Okay, so welcome to Facebook Evaluations Part J. We are on our 10th group of evaluations, and this is actually the last day that I will be accepting entries to the Ravel Orchestration Challenge. And it's really been a good run so far. I think we're going to end up with 50 or 60, maybe even 70 scores total when you include all of the Patreon evaluations that are coming up in a couple of days. And I've really enjoyed it. It's after a while, certain things are, certain observations are becoming a little repetitive. But on the other hand, the approaches that everybody is taking are different enough to where it still remains a very exciting, fun experience for me. Now, we're going to just start here with Eusebius's score, and just really a very interesting, very cool piece of arranging. And there are a few overall things, once again, like so many other scores, there's very little in the way of inflections or nuances inside some of these melodic lines. There are just, there are, like, for instance, tailing off with a hairpin, but I'm not really seeing a lot of inner life in a lot of these entries. And, there's some general gestures like, crescendo and diminuendo at the end of phrases. But yeah, I do like the fact that there was some, there was an allargando here, just, preparing this to be slower as it usually is played in the piano version. Okay, so let's move back to the beginning, and I'll comment as I go. This is a very fun kind of sound at the very beginning. English horn with clarinets, it partially doubled by violas. I'm wondering why it's partial rather than maybe divisi doubling of what was going on in the clarinets for just a more homogeneous mixture. Bassoons playing off of cellos, you're going to have a very wind-like texture with a little bit of support from the strings at this point. So it's really going to sound like chamber winds here with just a touch of strings. Now this is interesting. You have A2 flutes playing octave over the cor anglais. Okay, now the problem with this, even though it's a cool sound, this is kind of strange why there's a treble clef stuck right there. The problem is that when you go to the higher subject, you've given it away. Do you see what I mean? You've given away the jump to the octave. So the contrast of function is not so is basically it's you've already said this here, right? What is different about A is that the melody jumps up an octave and starts anew, starts everything all over again, basically just says the same thing again, right? With a slightly larger, airier kind of accompaniment in the piano version. But here you've already told us that, right? As you've already put in the flutes above. It's not a bad out of balance texture. You probably don't even need the horns here. Nice little touches of harp. That's very cool. Okay. But anyway, basically your horns are just, more or less doubling the clarinets, right? At least right here. And so, I don't know. I'm not sure what. It's just a kind of a color thing, anyway. But good for you for keeping them in the background. Now, I'm not so sure why the harp has to be pianissimo though, because it is the quietest instrument, the quietest standard instrument in the orchestra, aside from certain percussion instruments. So, you really have to, mark this at P rather than PP, right? So, and here you are attempting to emphasize the voice of the clarinet against its neighbors, right? And of course, you're making allowances for the quieter sound of the flute. But really, what you should be marking here is P for everybody and maybe mezzo piano for the flutes, right? So everybody should really be the same volume as much as possible, and the clarinet should be marked solo, right? So P solo espressivo will shine out over the rest of the instruments, especially if the functions are just very, very clear, okay? Or they could all be pianissimo, all right? But, I mean, I see what you're trying to do here, and it's very delicate, and it's very cool, and it could easily work. But just keep in mind that everybody is listening to everybody else. Somebody will think, oh, wow, well, that guy's playing more of a piano than a pianissimo. I better play a little louder, because they can't see what each other's parts are marked, right? So very seldom should you try to mark parts differently, unless there is an instrument that obviously gets marked down a lot, like, say, horns or trumpets, and they will realize that they're supposed to play softer. But in a general sense, when you have, like, a section that's used to playing together and balancing just on their own, you don't need to do this kind of tweaking, except for, like, maybe flutes, like marking the flutes up a little bit because of them being drowned out, and that's also something that they will generally understand. Okay, so yeah, nice clarinet solo. Once again, it's just really, there's just phrase marks over these wind lines, and it would be nice for you to really think about how people are breathing, and how people are articulating. Right? Is the clarinetist going da 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 da, or are they going da 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 da, or are they just going da? I mean, you just really have to think about that the inflection, is just so important there. Nuances, inflections, the exact enunciation of the speech of these solo lines is just really, really crucial that you think about all those things. This is kind of interesting, this bassoon and horn line right in here. It's going to be fairly strong. You can mark the horn triple P, but I'm not really sure that it's going to add much more than just a slightly, if this is just meant to be sort of a touch of color, where that kind of just comes together with the bassoon here. I'm not even sure that you need that. This really seems more like a bassoon thing than a horn thing. Sorry, this seems more like a bassoon thing than a horn thing. So, yeah, nice little touches from the harp, by the way. I like that. Now, keep in mind that when you mix the clarinet line with the violins, which, by the way, look at the beautiful bowing and phrasing on this. Why couldn't the clarinet do that so that they would match? Or maybe have shorter lines of breath and articulation. Anyway, okay, so here you get to tremolo in the flute. Do not do this, okay? This is my big, strong advice to you, Eusebius. Don't mark tremolo over a part in the flutes. And actually, don't mark tremolo and then not put in these kinds of bars. Look, see, you put in, beams, I should say. You put in tremolo beams, and that's extremely clear, right? All you have to do is mark FLZ, or FLZ, for Flutterzungen, which means flutter-tonguing in German. Okay, so flutter-tonguing, and then you mark the tremolo mark, and then you don't have to mark FLZ anymore, right? It's just taken as a given. Whenever you put the triple beams under the notes, then it is just tremolo all the way through. Okay, so don't mark tremolo, because you never know. Like whether you'll get that or not. If somebody has to jump back to a certain bar and they don't see the word tremolo, right? See, like let's say in their part, the conductor says, "Okay, everybody come back to bar 35, right?" Where there isn't a tremolo marking. So unless the player, you'll find when you get the part back from the musician, if you look at it, you'll see that they've marked it here, and they may have actually gone through with a pen and just scribbled in tremolo beams, at different entrances. So you might as well just do that. So don't do this, please, everybody. Don't mark tremolo and not put in tremolo beams. Don't mark tremolo. Put in the tremolo beams and mark FLZ or FLZ, okay? That's what you need to do. All right, so enough of my lecture. This is kind of nice, Okay, kind of fun. And then cor anglais picks it up. Okay, it's not, there will be a bit of a similarity up there between the two voices. Okay, it's kind of nice what you're doing there. Now here you really thicken the line. You adding the oboe, cor anglais below, right? And yeah, you should probably mark. Yeah, see, there's no marking of how many oboes. You have just one oboe? Okay, you have just one oboe. All right, that's fine. Okay, yeah, it just seems really kind of a thick thing to do here, And then here the flute goes down into its weak register, right? And then jumps back up. I mean, mezzo forte, right? So it's going to be hard to hear the flute down there, right? So really it's the clarinet is the voice that you're going to hear, right? So this is completely unnecessary. All right, even the E, I would say just come in on the B flat. Okay, all right, so continuing on. Yeah, this is nice and strong. The doubling the first violin with the flute. Okay, and not bad, It's very, very boom chuck chuck. There's like a lot of the or pa. There's really a lot of emphasis on the rhythm in this, and that's nice. And it's done in a very delicate, very cool way. I like the octaves here. How come you didn't support the octave below with a wind instrument here? There's a lot of people that are not really doing anything all that important, right? Okay, then it just becomes very thick and very powerful going to the allargando. I like this. This is nice. Okay, so here we go with the big payoff. Okay, we've got octaves in the flutes. We've got octaves in the trumpets. Now, here's the thing, is that the trumpet is kind of coming out of nowhere, and all of a sudden you have this massive fortissimo going all the way up to high C. Okay, that is going to be the dominant sound here. You're not going to hear much of any. You're going to hear that, and you're going to hear the strings. Right? And the strings are going to blend together with the flutes, but man, this is going to be a very trumpety passage, especially with that high C at fortissimo. Everything above G at fortissimo, right? So I would say just watch out, especially if the other people are marked F. Why are the trumpets marked fortissimo? I just wonder about that, because they're going to dominate everything. Nice scoring of the counter melody. That's very cool. Yeah, that should work. Everything else should work pretty well. Yeah, and, a fairly good brass scoring, aside from the objection that I had there about the trumpet. I mean, and you've got more trumpet coming up, right? So, the trumpet starts the cool down. I feel like it's just all trumpet all of a sudden. And, of course, the trumpet is just going to completely kill this flute here. Right, there'll be a touch of flute in it, right, and it'll blend together well. The flute will blend together well with the strings, which is actually really powerful here. It's just a very thick texture that you're scoring there. Then bassoons with violas will seem like a big drop down in terms of textural strength. All right, and then horn gets the melody. That's okay, except once again. Just the tonguing, this is going to be incredibly awkward in terms of, imagine what you're asking the trumpet player to do, very high. There's just really and then the trombone, same exact idea. It just doesn't, trombones don't really slur like you think that they do. And trumpets way up high, doing a slurred pianissimo up to G, a written G, it just does not really feel right to me. Okay, this is nice though. Okay, and then our final little thing with the flutes going high. And so I think this needs to be worked out a little bit better in the strings, exactly how they're going to play these. How they're going to play all of these harmonics. And look, you have 3 two high strings, right? The violins, and you have a middle string, middle to high strings, violas, which could be taking parts of these chords, right, and separating them out if you really want to play exactly what's in the piano part. Okay, this is nice too. Okay, there was this one other thing. Okay, you're just saying tremolo. Once again, don't mark tremolo. Mark the tremolo beams and say Flauterzungen at the beginning of the thing, and then and where does it end? Does it keep going? Natural. I see. Okay. Yes, he said that's the thing, is that people will see it applied, the word tremolo applied to one kind of thing, and then things will go on, and they'll think, what, am I supposed to keep tremoloing? Please remember these words: raised hands rob rehearsal time, right? And I can see a lot of rehearsal time being robbed here just because of not clear instructions. Don't say tremolo, say FLZ, and then mark the beams on what you want. And then you don't have to say natural, right? It just is taken as a given when you stop using the tremolo beams that it is natural. Now, you're not really thinking this through, okay? A clarinet playing Flauterzungen on a beautiful, smooth, finishing line, it's going to sound very weird. And also, Flauterzungen on an English horn is really, and Flauterzungen on an English horn and bassoon together, that is going to be a really weird sound. It's just really going to be, it's going to be flatulent, okay? It's not what you think this is. It's not this delicate little fluttering, twittering kind of thing that the flute can do. It just is not going to be there. Okay, sorry, I'm kind of beating you up on the Flauterzungen. Okay, all right, and this ending, not bad at all. So look, I really enjoyed this score. There's just a really fun first score to get into this next round of Facebook evaluations. So on to the next one, and thank you so much, Eusebius, for your very cool score. Okay, so our next score is by Jasper, or Jasper. I don't know which country you come from, but we'll just say Jasper, okay, because I'm an American, and that's the way I would pronounce it or think about it when I'm thinking about you scoring this. Yeah, so a really fun start here with this score, and you've thought about some of the phrasing and the inflections. Now here, I would say don't write simile on the dynamics. Score them all the way through, okay? Because the player is, when the line gets to different places where it rises or does other things, the player's still going to want guidance, okay? You can't just write simile on things like this, on your nuances. You have to score them out all the way through. And just one comment here that I've made before, and that is when the accompaniment slurs a lot, then you have a very slidey, less emphatic kind of support, kind of rhythmic pulse, right? So that's what I felt through this, and I actually listened to your mock-up, and yeah, it was just very there really wasn't much of a pulse going through it. It just was very kind of calm, and that's I don't want to disrespect that too much. That was actually kind of cool. I liked it. But it still doesn't have the same kind of drive of this really being a waltz, right? This isn't something you could really dance to. But nice safe treatment at the beginning, with strings and a little bassoon. Now here, you really increase quickly into your next idea, piano to mezzo forte. So there's really a contrast here. You have this interesting idea of the of either the winds or the strings just dropping in a teeny little bit of support above or alongside of, and then dropping out. And I think that's kind of neat. That's something I would not have thought of myself as an orchestrator, at least in orchestrating this piece. But yeah, fairly thick textures though, added here by the horns. I would say I would mark the horns at piano, actually, right? Because you are not going to hear the second violins after this, right? Just whenever the horns drop in to double the second violins, there will be no second violins, if they're both playing mezzo forte. And especially Poco F, man, it's just like there's nothing left there in the middle, and you will barely be able to hear the melody of the first violin. All right, moving on. Clarinets. This is also a neat way of dealing with this. I really love the very clarinetish sound, and to have the antique cymbal come in and just go ding, that's kind of fun. Having a slightly there's a slightly deranged sound to the antique cymbals as compared to the sort of perfectly clear sound of the glockenspiel. So I think that's kind of adds a nice, almost toy piano kind of a sound here. And I like this spread across. Once again, it's not going to be as emphatic as pizzicato or staccato or separated notes, but it's still pretty cool. All right, and then leading up to flutes. Now, if you really want this to dovetail beautifully and evenly, you'll do it on a single note, okay? Rather than on, like thinking that this will overlap in a more precise way. It doesn't really do that. Not the way that you think, okay? And especially if they're both doing a crescendo, right? The clarinet will just dominate all the way to this note. There's nothing that the flute player can do that will be able to control the sound of the clarinet there. All right. Moving on. Nice. This is nice. Once again, the horn should be marked down a little bit. And see here, now you're doing the reverse of that. Just, a touch of strings while the winds go on, and a touch of strings again, and then the strings coming together. This is pretty nice. It would have been interesting to hear some kind of support to the second violins as well as the firsts, just to get a better balance. Okay, and this is nice, this little tiny touch of timpani. Triangle is fine. If your orchestra is strapped on its budget, it might just play triangle where you have indicated your antique cymbals, because not every if you're doing this with a regional orchestra, they may not even have access to that. Okay, so perfect flute line, nice support by oboes. That's pretty much a given. I think I did that too. Is a touch, just using the flute there. It was a pretty obvious choice, but very effective all the same. Then the oboe coming in, and that's a nice blend there. Okay, now this is interesting. You do some things where there will be doubling, and then the doubling instrument drops out and just adds, like, say, in this case, a touch of staccato. In this case, the doubling instruments, are going up here, and you would think that this would sort of settle on an E flat up high here, but you go up to a high G flat and then hold it, as a high pedal over this little contribution by the flutes. So those are nice atypical choices, and I thought that those were very interesting. I mean, I'm giving you a lot of praise on this, and there's still a lot to work on this. So don't think that just because I think something is really cool and innovative that the entire piece doesn't need some work. It almost always does, including me. I will score something I think that is perfect, and then I'll think about something that I could fix, much later. After it's been performed several times, in fact. Okay, in moving on, trumpets, I think that the trumpets need to be marked down here to mezzo forte. I think this is just too strong. Same thing with the timpani. All right. And see, you're doubling trumpets below flutes, and that can be a very, very pointy sound, sort of like two clarinets playing octaves. It can just really be slightly punishing to the ear. So you should really, if you have experience listening to what this sounds like, then I think that you're making the right choice, possibly. But if you don't know what this really sounds like with real instruments, really playing this in octaves in this way, this exposed way, watch out. And, once again, we've got touches of doubling, dropping out, and then coming back in. That's a very cool idea too. Oboes and clarinets at octaves. Wondering why there couldn't be, you could easily score divisi octaves here for the violins, and then get both of these, cover both of these. All right, and then we get to our appassionato. I would say here that my problem here with the appassionato is I don't think you set it up sufficiently. You have these lines that come to an end, and then suddenly the bass ends, right? So there isn't any pulse pushing into this. You just have a big roll here on timpani, right? And you have this rising line. But there's a total dropout here, right? And so it's even evident from your mock-up, which once again I had to listen to, and I just feel that there just isn't any big push up to this huge appassionato. Now, the thing about it is that there doesn't have to be. Do you know what I mean? Except that this is a waltz, right? So, with the waltz, if the waltz partner is going to throw his date up into the air and then grab her on beat 3, then he doesn't have any cue, right? It's like there's nothing in this music that's saying, okay, here we go, wee, we're just going to go, we're just going to have this big push right here. So there isn't anything to guide the dancer. If this were choreographic work, then it would be difficult for the players. Okay. Now, this is interesting. Why is there no strings on the downbeat? I mean, was there some reason? Bum, ba, da, 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 da. It's just a little strange to me. And same thing with the clarinets. Why are the clarinets dropping out of the first beat? Because, you just end up having a weaker downbeat, right? But the counter melody is pretty cool. Oboes and violas is not the most obvious choice, but it still is all right. Clarinet will just be doubling the flute and, in the middle voice there. This is going to be slightly piercing sounding, right? Because you're using all square wave instruments, if you know what I mean. So clarinets and flutes are both square wave instruments, and they have a way of sort of having a kind of a locked up sounding overtone. Whereas oboes are sort of sawtooth waves. So if you blend the two, then it isn't quite so. There isn't so much agreement with all the overtones, right? And you have a more mixed, more homogeneous sound. So anyways, it's just the way that you've stacked everything together there is going to be a very, very cutting sound, But I guess, when you are doubling these with the violins, you could have actually thrown in divisi second violins to get the bottom note of the clarinets and just to make it very much more silky, right? Anyway, so everything else is fairly well scored. This C trumpet going up to this high B flat is just going to basically kill everybody else. There's not going to be, you might as well not even put the flute in there, right? And just have them doubling the piccolo an octave higher. It just is really going to be a powerful sound. People are scoring high C's and high B flats for the C trumpet, at fortissimo, and it is just going to be a dominating sound. And see, when you come to a stop here and then just go to the other instruments, there will be a huge drop off in terms of intensity and projection. Right, so you have to think about those things. It's like a loaded weapon. Okay, so I'll stop scolding and I'll move on. So cool down is pretty good, and I like the little bassoon line there. Okay, and then the clarinet's answering. Yeah, that's all very fun. This is nicely done, and I like the little answer. Okay, and this is interesting that you have violas all the way down. Now, it is sufficient to score separate notes here, but it would have almost been cooler to just write mark staccato there, or some other kind of thing that would kind of break up the sense of smoothness. Okay, or just at least alert the player that things should be separate. Okay, and you got the piccolo in there to help with your high stuff. Um, yeah, and you're just very, very slowly dropping out the string texture and adding the wind texture there. Yeah. Okay. This is nice. The oboes and clarinets are not going to be as soft as you want them to be here, but it's still a cool idea. Okay. Flutes and clarinet are going to give you that real beautifully, crystal clear triple pianissimo that is just really, really soft. But I mean, you can get an oboe to be really, really soft, but it's not going to have the same kind of very, cool, very calm sound right there. It'll be more warm. Okay. But other than that, really cool ideas. A lot of things I didn't think about, and I always like that. And yeah, very fun work. And I'm really glad that I took a look at it. And thank you so much, Jasper. Our third piece is by Joaquin, and yeah, just I really enjoyed this. There was this technique of hocketing, which is to just sort of trade off between instruments, basically trade off a line over different different voices, and I thought that worked pretty well. I mean, I thought that this was a good approach. Now, I'm going to comment a little bit on something I've commented on before, and that is that, pizzicato and timpani strokes don't really need to be marked out to full value like this. The essence of the quality of sound is that, it creates a sort of a puncture in the stillness of the air in a concert hall, and that puncture resonates across the acoustics of the chamber. So even if a timpanist hits the notes and then damps them immediately, the sound will hang in the air, right? That's the essence of what is going on here. And I'm seeing a lot of people take advantage of different contemporary techniques of allowing the timpani to just vibrate and not to damp it. Or just unconsciously do that technique, not realizing that it is a technique and that it has a very special context, which usually has to do with soloing and with contemporary chamber music, with special effects and things like that. Now, here I feel that that's being used arbitrarily, and it would be better just to mark these as just single quarter notes, And the same thing with the pizzicato in the basses and the cellos. There is going to be the understanding that those, that the quality of tone is going to continue, right? But I would really like people to have a certain standard default approach to pizzicato and to timpani strokes that respects the traditions and the general approach of the player, so that when this is used intentionally, then it has much more meaning. Okay? All right. So, but otherwise, the hocketing went pretty well. And here we get into a slight dissonance between the idea of the hocketing and the sense of extended harmony with the bassoons and horns. Now, it's really important in a situation like this to control how loud those horns are. So you're saying pianissimo crescendo. So they're going to crescendo up to the same volume as everybody else. Now, I saw what you were trying to do here, and I felt that it would work, but it just really would need some control here so that the horns would not penetrate the texture. That, you have this beautiful, delicate texture going on, and then you chuck the bassoons and the horns right in the middle of it, right? I feel that this should not be crescendo anything, right? You say, hey, crescendo. What if it just continued to be pianissimo, right? And everybody else could just trot along at piano, and these players could try to control this warm sound that they're developing here. I feel that would be a lot more effective. And then you continue on hocketing away, which is kind of cool. Now, I noticed that you've separated the clarinets into two separate staves, and I feel that that's unnecessary because they're just playing intervals, really. I mean, I'm not seeing a huge difference between the clarinet parts so far. Yeah. But yeah, this all still works. Still works pretty good. And then you throw in the clarinet, sorry, the C trumpet. See, now even here, so you've got these two lines. I still feel that you could possibly score this on the same staff. It might look a little messy, but yeah. So yeah, this is going to have the same problems. The English horn and clarinet are going to present the same problems of the hocketing approach that you had before, and especially here when you've got nothing to maintain the sense of separation, right? See, here in the seconds and the violas, you had a sense of separating the beats out so that the little extra note there could just jump in. But here, not so much, right? So it's just going to have these little boops. I mean, there's a certain charm to that as well, so I'm not going to knock it too much, but I'm just saying that for me, this sort of falls apart a little teeny bit. All right, now going on to, flute and first violins, that's going to work really nicely. This is pretty well scored as well. I like the idea that the doubling is below at an octave. Now this, I feel you're just not thinking about how this is going to sound. Do you really want da-da-da-da-da-da-dum? Or do you want da-da, or da-dum, or da-da-da-da? I feel that there's some slurs that need to be in here for the line to just really sweep smoothly up to the next little bit of phrase. Okay. Speaking of phrasing, I'm glad that you worked out what you wanted there. I think that this doesn't really work for me as an arranger, but it works for you, and that's fine. I respect it. Yeah, so clarinets and violins, just pretty standard sound there, and you're just really keeping your eye on the beat, and I think that that's great. English horn here, doubled by violin, second violin, and then the octave down for cellos. That's pretty effective. And then I like the fact that you've got the horns here, 2 octaves below the violins. And that is kind of fun because the horn fills in everything above it, right? So that works pretty well. Yeah, and once again, slurs. I just feel that slurs really are needed here, because otherwise you got that da-da-da-da-da-dum. It doesn't quite work for me. But that's my preference. Now here, I would try to, just select this bar. This appears to be Sibelius. Select this bar and type Command Return to force a new page, right? Because this is kind of hard for me to evaluate, right? I'm sort of thinking, okay, yay, this happens here, and then, right, I got to turn the page, and so I can't really see the whole effect of the passage, right? Now here, a much saner approach overall, if you accept basically that the oboes are just going to get blasted out by the trumpet, but at least the trumpet is marked forte and the oboe is marked fortissimo. And you got your clarinets in there too. So this is going to be more of a blend, but it's still going to be very dominated by the trumpet. You could get the same effect, everybody, with the trumpet an octave lower. And then you get that nice fat trumpet sound, and then you don't have to score anything on the same notes except for maybe the English horn, or the English horn can do the counter melody. Yeah, but I just feel that high scoring of the trumpet just suddenly brings in this massive, strong texture to something that was very delicate before. Okay. And then, counter melody, fairly well scored. Yeah, it all pretty much works. Okay. And the cool down is very nice. It's just all sort of blended textures. This is not really rational to, that slur isn't going to work. Slurring from solo way over crossing strings. There's no way that you can slur from the C string, right? In order to play G flat, you're going to be playing on the lowest string, the fourth string. And this E flat is going to be, you're going to have to play that on, or the cellist is going to have to play that on probably on their first string or their second string. So there is going to be at least one string in between this that you have to slur over. So that just is not rational. Please don't score these kinds of slurs, all right? Slur, I mean, it's more of an expressive thing, really, what you're saying here, but really try to be more precise. Okay. Yeah, and here I felt it just would have been nice to see some kind of slurring strategy here. Whether it's dun 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 or dun 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 dun. Just having more, being more in touch with inflection, the inflection of the articulation. Okay, and then back to Hocketing. Same thing there, all pretty effective. And so this is interesting, is flutter tonguing, you should mark FLZ. Because and you should just mark a straight tremolo there because the tempo is too fast for this to really be played as separate notes. So just mark a tremolo over there. So 3-beam tremolo is what I mean. Okay, and English horn nearly all the way down till you get to bassoon. And yeah, staccatos. So this is all very nice. And a complete rest, and then adding the last chord. You don't need to do a buzz roll. Just mark. That's not really a timpani technique. That is a different kind of thing. Okay, really just mark the standard triple beam tremolo there. All right, and you also have to mark a fermata on this note. Well, anyways, look, really, really fun score. Just very enjoyable once again, and people are coming up with these neat ideas. I'm sitting here picking them apart and stuff, but it's still, a lot of things that it didn't occur to me to do. So it's just fun seeing, the variety of ideas and that everybody is bringing to it. So thanks again. On to the next score. Okay, score number 4 is by Lou, and just to sort of bring this up again, I would really like people to score 2 on a part, okay, because this is going to be very difficult for anybody to read and understand on the screen as they are looking over my shoulder as I'm doing this video. I could increase the size a little bit, but then I can't see the whole page. Do you know what I mean? So if you have 2 flutes and 2 oboes and 2 clarinets and 2 bassoons that each that are on conjoined staves, then and it just score these in two voices on the same staff, like a sort of like a more like a published score. Then you are, then it's easier for me to display on this screen. I know, I'm almost saying like do this for my convenience, but also do it for the convenience of the people who are going to watch this evaluation, right? And there's usually just no need to do it in the first place, to split it up in the first place, because you've got, like here you could just mark this as trombone 1, and then this is trombone 2 on the same staff, right? Just showing us. So yeah. Another thing is the layout of the score. This really should all be one bar line crossing all of the wind parts and then breaking here right above the brass. And then the same thing with this brace. The brace should cover all of the winds. Okay, because the way that it's split up into sort of different, like this piccolo staff up here and bassoon 2 below, and it's just very kind of hard to grasp everything, especially with so many staves. All right, so that's my scolding. All right, now on to the scoring. of the piece. It's kind of nice. I like the way that you have separated, different articulations of groups of notes or pairs of notes. I think that's a very effective approach. You have to be a little bit more precise in places like this, where you've got a slur and then you've got a tie here. You probably intended this to cover all of these notes, but you can't just slur from the end of a tie like this. You should slur the tied group and then the rest of the phrase, or just start a new slur on the next note after the tie. It's just a little less confusing. Okay. Now, the texture is pretty good. English horns plus bassoons, you can't go wrong. And then you've got a little support from the strings below. That's all good. Now, I listened to your mock-up, and I don't really usually make comments about this, but I really think you need to get some sort of new sounds. I'm wondering if this is Sibelius. Doesn't really look like a Sibelius font. So one thing I just really advise, just try to find some new sound set or something to work with, because your clarinets sound like muted horns or muted trumpets. It just is an awful, awful sound. And if you are scoring to that sound, it just really just sounded like muted trumpets to me. If you are scoring to that sound, then you are missing you're totally missing a certain color that should actually be more accurate. Now, I noticed that you are bringing out the solo solo clarinet as mezzo forte and then crescendoing into the oboes. Okay, you don't need to do that. This could all be piano. Everything could be piano, and the brass could be pianissimo. That would be a balance. The same thing here. Just say P solo, right? And then you don't need to get quite that loud going up to mezzo forte, but if that's where you feel the music needs to go, that's fine, but have everybody go along, right? But I would say don't do this kind of separate mixing. Just basically mark solo over the part that you want to be marked louder. And once again, I'm going to keep repeating this till people start doing it. Lines like this need nuances. They need little hairpins of crescendo and diminuendo to guide the players. Right? And here you did this beautiful separation of the phrases into separate, articulations of breathing or, of slurring into pairs of notes. What happened here? And for the rest of the piece, did you just kind of get bored with it? Sorry, I mean that sounds kind of like a slam. I don't mean to be that way, but like really, seriously, what do you want these wind instruments to express all the way through the piece? I just would really like to see this more worked out with everybody's score. But I just felt like it was such a good start, and I wanted to see you continue on with more of a thought towards breathing and slurring and connecting notes with breath. Okay, so like for instance here, you do that great, right? I'm just wondering why it isn't everywhere. Because like obviously some of these lines are just not, they're just so long and so slurred, it's just not rational. Now here is where you need the tenor clef. This is a tenor clef line, and pretty much so is this. You could just put both of these parts on the same staff, put a tenor clef here, mark the first one 1 and the second one 2, right? And then problem solved. Okay, but for all that, it's not too badly scored. Just thought it was fun. And then adding harp here. The harp is a good support to what you've got going on here. It's not bad at all. And then look, nicely articulated, slurred, a flute line, right? You don't want to skimp on any of this stuff. This is going to be okay. I usually come after people for scoring like low E flats here, saying, "Oh, that's just going to be drowned out." But there is almost no texture going on here, So it's, although. Speaking, to be completely precise about it, this note and this note are exactly the same note. If nobody's going to hear this E flat, I would just say rest and then start on this note, right? And then it just makes more sense to me. Anyhow. And nice glissando. Thought that was this is very Hollywood-like, and you're adding a lot more, I won't go into the balance. This is actually hard for me to read. My eyes are getting very old, and creaky. And okay, here don't mark ottava over a viola part. Just go to treble clef and then mark these as they are written. Because string players, they think in terms of ledger lines when they are working at their fingerings. So do not mark an ottava over a string part. Okay? Only do it for the convenience of the score reader. And, with the understanding that you're going to score everything out in a way that's more readable for the string player. But really try not to add ottava marks just in general at all. Okay, cuivre is more of an instruction to the horns. Like, say you're saying cuivre for the horns. Cuivre for trumpet, it's like unnecessary because you're up here and you are giving the trumpet this high A flat, right? And so, they're going to be pushing it. They don't really need the instruction to to play cuivre. You don't mark cuivre for the heavy brass. That's more of a horn thing. Okay. Yeah, but I know what you mean. You want everything to be very brassy and brash sounding, but you just get that through marking your dynamics and using the registers of the heavy brass instruments correctly. Okay, then you have this enormous sweep here. And I like the fact that you have taken a sort of a chordal approach with it, right? So the oboes are on a B flat at the beginning of the sweep, and the flutes are on a D flat, and the English horn is, down there on a concert F, and everything else. I think that's really cool to make this more chordal. A lot of people were not taking advantage of the fact that it could be, but what's going on in the strings? How do they get from nothing to here, right? Shouldn't they all be part of it? Right? Okay. And this is interesting that you have the brass hitting the beginnings of these notes. I think that's a cool idea. I'm not so sure that it's supported in the scoring, but it's something that you could explore more. Okay, and it's the same thing. You kind of do the same thing here, right? And then appassionato, just really pushing it with these guys. This will work for the flutes, but that is a really high, going all the way up E flat and F for the English horn. That is barely possible for your average English horn player, which you have to understand is usually the second or third oboist, who, they're getting a little bit of extra money by playing an auxiliary, and sometimes they're not as, even in a sort of a standard orchestra, they may not be the kind of player that can just pop out a high E flat and an F at the drop of a hat. Okay, so I just feel this is very high scoring for an English horn, where the note that you intend is a high A flat, which could just easily be played by English horn, or by oboe. So look, instead of doing A2 with the oboes, just give one of these parts to the oboe, or maybe give this part to the English horn and give that part to the first oboe, and you will get what you want there. Okay. Yeah, and this is just it's like 3 on a part here. It's three flute sounds, right? It's A2 flutes and piccolo playing exactly the same line. Which is supported here or doubled by the violin. So it's going to be hugely penetrating up there. Yeah, I almost feel like there's not quite enough support on the 2 octaves below. I mean, there's like no support at all on the viola line, right? So I think this needs to be thought out a little bit more. But there are some cool ideas here, and I'm glad that you just gave little bits of emphasis to the beginnings of these of the counter melody, so that it wouldn't get too heavy in the brass. That's really cool. Okay, dolce is an expression mark that needs to go beneath, right? And this is still fortissimo. Where's the sense of cool down here? Everybody is still just playing their hearts out. They're just fortissimo here. I think you meant to go decrescendo here, diminuendo here, going into maybe more like F, right? And maybe P on the horns, right? And maybe, F dolce on the I mean, dolce is really an instruction that you give to somebody who's playing a melody, right, rather than a harmony. I mean, and divisi is a term given to the strings, never to the brass or the winds. They don't need it. You know, when two voices appear in a brass part, we know that it's two. When a single note appears, though, we need to know what that note means. Does it mean a two? It means with two players? In which case you would write a two, not tutti. Okay. Yeah. And you have exposed a two oboes, which is going to be a very trumpet-like, very harsh cutting sound. And then you have a two exposed clarinets, which is going to be a very phased sound, very almost electronic type sound with if there's a lot of pushing. Then you have a two exposed bassoons, which isn't too bad, but has kind of a rough sound. See, all of these could have been achieved with single instruments, right? Just cut out the a two stuff. They are loud enough. A two does not make things twice as loud. A two just makes things sort of chorused or phased. Okay, now a two on horns and trumpets, that's a different story. That gives a much louder sound, but that's because it's the sense of projection is in a single direction rather than going, in a sort of a cloud around the player and having a different kind of embouchure. All right, I'll get into the mechanics of that some other time. This is nice. Trumpet over the bassoons. That is a long slur. And this is neat too. There's some cool stuff in here. Don't get me wrong, Lou. I'm not saying that your orchestration is bad at all. It's really, really fun. It's just going to need a lot of touching up. And this works really beautifully. This harp over the brass, it's going to work great because of the difference of the sound and the softness of the brass. Yeah, so this is all very nice. Really enjoying looking over this score. And yeah, so other parts to do here. And I love this little sweep down to these notes. That's very, very nice. So yeah, so thank you very much for sharing this with me. I saw a lot of very fun things in here, different approaches, once again, than what I would do. But, that is what is really fun for me, is just seeing all the different ways that people are scoring this. So yeah, so now on to our last score for Batch J. Okay, so our last score for Batch J of these Facebook evaluations is by Oskar. And I really enjoyed this piece. Oskar said on Facebook that he was a beginning orchestrator, hadn't really done a whole lot yet. And I think that there's a lot of potential here. I think that there's some cool ideas. I mean, there's going to be a lot of tweaking that needs to be done if this score were to be performed. But, there's a lot of forethought and there are some neat ideas too. So once again, Oskar, you probably heard me mention this before, but melody lines for winds and strings really do need to have inflections. They need to have hairpins, leading the player expressively, like diminuendo and crescendo, really kind of telling us where to go and what to do. And there need to be slurs that guide the player in how they connect notes rather than just an entire long phrase, but to have smaller groups of notes that can have more that can have more attack at different places and more smooth connections in other places, right? So like just think go ta and then sing the rest, right? So ta is what you're asking the player to do, rather than ta 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 ta, right? Or ta 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 ta, or even ta 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 ta, right? See, there's all of those different little ways of slurring these notes create just different meaning in the phrase, right? So please think about those things. Now here, I thought this was neat. You have your English horn, and you seem to go up here, and then suddenly a two oboes and then English horn on a concert E flat, and bassoon 1, right, is playing a C flat there, or sorry, yeah, C flat, and yeah, so you've got this really cool little wind texture, wind chorale happening there, and I think that's just really a lovely idea. You don't need two oboes, right? A single oboe is going to be much better in this context, right? Because you only have a single bassoon. It just is going to be a much more pleasant sound. All right. So I thought that was fun. Excuse me. And then bringing in more bassoon and support, and keeping the horns in the background. You probably don't need. This could probably be taken care of by the clarinets maybe, or you got bass clarinet in here. That's just so much easier to get a fine point on the dynamics than with the horns, which are a much stronger, more penetrating sound. Now you do have doubling by the seconds and the violas, but I mean still. Here you're at pianissimo and you're going up to a high A flat. Written A flat. That is going to be a very, very tough thing for the player. This is going to just dominate the texture. Like, what you really want is doubling this D flat here in the second violins. That should be done by like maybe second clarinet or first oboe or something like that. But yeah, the horns are just going to just overwhelm the sound there. They're going to be trying to play very soft on that high A flat, and they're going to get really mad because they can't make it work, right? Don't ask the player to do something they can't do, that they're going to work really hard to do and then just sound awful with, right? So, yeah. And now here you're starting to be more judicious. You're going da, da, da. That's cool, but it still feels a little arbitrary. Maybe there's more shape to this line that could be put in there. This was neat with the harp. Why not put it in other places? It sort of seems like the beginning of an idea, and then you kind of ran out of time, maybe? You could put it every second bar. Anyway, this would be a nice idea to put in with harp. So, first flute, first clarinet, playing a little duo there. It's very charming. It works out great. And then violins come in doubling the flutes. That's all very cool. Here, don't go to A2, right? Go to just a single instrument if you are cooling down. Right? Going to A2 is not to strengthen the tone, but to make it more intense, to sort of make it more nasal, right? If an oboe sounds nasal, then you add two of them together and it sounds more nasal. If a clarinet sounds sort of tooty, sort of like an organ, maybe an organ stop, and then you add two of them together, then you get a phased organ stop, right? So just don't do this when you want to cool down your line. Just leave it out, right? Okay. Yeah. In this contrabassoon line, just really, it's better for you to do two bassoons an octave apart than it is for you to throw in this contrabassoon here, going all the way up to E flat, right? Because this line is completely playable by the second bassoon. So give it to the second bassoon, right? Don't take your contrabassoons up high unless you're making a point about something. The same thing here. A2 on your, you don't need this, just single players. Same thing with the trombone. A2 trombone suddenly coming in pianissimo, that doesn't make any sense. Just have everybody be very soft on single instruments. Okay. Otherwise, you're just going to swamp the texture here. Okay. And then this is this low piccolo solo. It's really, really great. And I love the way that you just bridge over to the flutes here. This could just be a single flute as well to keep the texture just very, very gentle to mix in with the glockenspiel and the celesta, which is going to be a bit tinkly, but not too bad. Okay. And this is a little strange. You're going up to this high E flat, but you're not really bridging from there to here, right? So, the note that is being played here is E flat above this B flat, right? So it doesn't really connect, right? It doesn't swoop up. It swoops up and then drops down, right? Whereas if you just got rid of this piccolo part and dropped the violins down an octave, then this would sweep up to the B flat, or the written B flat here, okay, sounding A flat. Right, and the same thing here. It's like these violins sweep up to a note they have to drop down to by a fifth. Right? It just doesn't. It sort of kind of. You're just going to feel this. You're going to feel the spike at the end of the phrase dropping down again. Okay, that's just my personal opinion on that. Clarinet and violin duo. That's very cool, and you keep your boop boop boops going. That's neat. As I said before, don't do things like this, where you have to cross a string or two strings on a slur, right? Just hit this and then slur these two notes if you need to. Okay, this is all cool. That's cool. Boy, this goes high. Okay, yeah, see, once again, you're going way higher than the note that you're going way higher than the note that you want to play and then dropping back down. Okay, it's fairly good. It needs a little tweaking, but it's all right. Okay, now here we go. Now what is going on here? Way too much dynamic mixing. Okay, and I'm going to say this again, Oskar, in case you missed it earlier. Everybody gets their own part in the orchestra. They think that everybody, in general, is playing about the same dynamic that they are, right? So the flute players are going to be sitting here playing at forte, and they're going to be hearing the piccolo playing fortissimo, and they're going to say, will you play quieter, please? Or they're going to say, wow, that is a loud forte that piccolo player is playing. We better play louder. Right? And then these people down here in the horn section, some of them are playing mezzo forte, some of them are playing mezzo piano. And generally speaking, they will default to the louder player, right? So if the horns are playing mezzo forte, then the brass might say, wow, that kind of a loud mezzo forte that the horns are playing, but we might as well play that too because we're all the brass section, right? So let's really try to balance our sound and all sound the same general sense of loudness since we're not really carrying the melody here. Right? And it just gets to be more and more mixed up and messed up, and everybody just like trying to follow everybody else's dynamic. And this is one of the reasons why you should score the music so the music naturally balances as much as possible. Right? So that is where the balance should not come from the dynamics as much as it should come from the scoring. Okay? I should write that in gold leaf on a piece of hickory and hang it over my desk, okay? So, but I don't know, I already know that. But you guys should really think about that. Scoring, the balance really comes from scoring more than it comes from marking the dynamics. So if the dynamics are basically just telling you what the temperature is in the bathtub, right? And the scoring is going to say whether or not that bathtub is comfortable or whether there's like a big cold spot in one side and a hot spot in the other and the rest of it is lukewarm. So I would say mark everybody fortissimo except for the brass, whom you should mark forte, and then problem solved, right? Because you want this to be, you don't want, mezzo piano is lukewarm water. You don't want your bass line to be lukewarm. You want everybody to be loud. You want them to be pushing here, right? So make those trombones and that tuba loud. And make those trumpets loud, too. They're not actually even going that far. They're just playing, they're supporting the counter melody, right? So make them loud. Mark them F. Okay? All right. Now you're marking like a lot of A4, basically A2 in the horns 1 and 2, and A2 in the horns 3 and 4. There's just a huge, huge line. Try to separate those things out a little bit. The same thing here. You've got A3 in the trumpets, right? You could get away with this whole thing with like a couple of trombones, a couple of horns, and a couple of trumpets, and basically get the same amount of effect there, right? You don't need to use so many unless you're really going to use them in more spread out harmonies, in more dense ways, in more forceful ways. Okay, neat idea with the celesta following the clarinet part and the clarinet dropping an octave. And then this being accompanied by first seconds and violas, then violas and cellos. I like that idea. That's really fun. And I like the way that you just really limited your horns down like that. Okay. And then English horn, echoed by flute, with supported by clarinets. And this was really cool too, right? You don't need A4 here though, right? Just two horns will do, or two horns harmonizing each other with support from the lower strings. All right, going on, and this was nice too. And you only need one set of strings. You don't need both firsts and seconds. All right, and then French horn. Now, so imagine how beautiful this would have been with, with the slurring and the phrasing worked out a lot better. Dun da da dun dun da da da, or dun da 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 da. Separate notes, or dun da da dun dun. There's a bunch of different ways of doing it. Okay, but I really like the fact that the horn takes over completely. I feel that the transition from horn to pizzicato string is not really a smooth kind of a, it's not really a handover as much as it is just kind of like other people coming in and commenting. If you wanted this to be a completely seamless kind of a handover, then I would say don't go to strings, go to bass clarinet and just have this dovetail on a single note, like on a single eighth note. So just staccato D natural, right? And then the bass clarinets come in doubling that and go bum 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 bum. Right? That would be probably the most seamless kind of handoff. Now this ending here is really beautiful, but this is a kind of a no way sort of situation here. I don't know of any flute players who could play triple P up on these highest notes. I mean, it's technically possible for some players who really, really work on some of these high notes and have but the standard concert flute player is going to look at this and say, you want what up there? It just is. And also when you're getting up into this, it's just, you might be able to get pianissimo here, but I would just say, just change the voicing of this harmony, right? So that you don't have incredibly high notes at such a low volume, right? It's possible electronically. It is not possible with the standard concert player. Okay, so I really enjoyed all of this. Just really, really fun. Whether it was more experienced orchestrators, just basically trying out like what would be a professional way of doing this, or whether it would be, beginning orchestrators just trying something out seriously for the first time. Everybody had great ideas and really fertile imaginations, and I just want to point out that you don't ever need to do this to mark an 8 over the over a piccolo part's treble clef. You do not need to. Everybody knows. That's something that everybody knows, that the part will be sounding an octave higher than scored. Okay. All right. So very, very cool. Thank you so much, everybody. And I really enjoyed myself. And now I think that there are going to be at least 2 more of these videos, so I better get started on them. Thanks a whole lot, everybody.